Good to see you this weekend. I'm Jeremiah, and I'm one of our teaching pastors, and we are in a series about people who annoy us, irritate us, frustrate us, exasperate us, test us, people who are difficult with us, people who disagree with us, and we're calling them button pushers. And what we've said over the course of this series is that there are all kinds of button pushers in our lives. You might be working with one 5 days a week. You might be married to one 24/7. You might be sitting next to one right now. You might be looking forward to seeing one in this upcoming holiday season. But there are people in our lives who are button pushers, and we're dealing with that as we're going through this series. But as we're dealing with this reality of button pushers, it's kind of a two-sided reality. Because there are the pushers, there are the people and what's external and what's on them, but then there's what's internal and what's on us. Because for every button pusher around me, we've said in your notes, for every button pusher around me, there is a button in me. For every button pusher around me, there's a button in me. There's a piece of this equation I can't control, and it's them. But there's a piece of this equation that I can learn from, and I can grow in, and I can move forward in, and it's the piece that has to do with me. And so each week we've looked at a button, and we've looked at how do I deal with this button that's in me. And this week we're looking at a button that I actually think is probably, of all the buttons we're looking at this series, the one with the most power to shape our lives for the good or the bad. The one with the most potential to actually be disruptive and difficult. The one with the most potential on the flip side to experience maybe the most freedom and the most life possible. My family has an Xbox, and one of the games that we have on this Xbox is a game that you have this little black hole that you can move around to different places in a landscape. And it's just a really simple game where you just move this black hole around, but whatever the black hole goes under, that item, falls down into the black hole. And so you set it under a flower pot, down goes the flower pot. You move it over and down goes the TV stand and on and on. And for every item that this black hole swallows, it becomes bigger and bigger until eventually you can swallow up a car, a house, a cliff, and you can move this thing around, but whatever's over it just down the hole disappears. Pause. Let me take you to a moment about a week and a half ago with my family. My family has told me, I'm not sure how I feel about you talking about us in services. And I'm like, but it's such good content. And so the middle ground is I won't name any names or identify any people specifically. So one family member whom I love, I had come down in the morning and I opened the water bill and I realized that the water bill was $100 higher than it should have been. And I asked everybody, what's going on with this? And family member one, whom I love, said, oh yeah, they told me that a toilet was running. I said, really? When did they tell you? A month ago. Great, and they forgot to tell me, and that's why our water bill was so high, okay? Another family member had forgotten to do, whom I love, had forgotten to do the dishes the night before, and so the kitchen was a total mess. Another family member whom I love had neglected to complete the online driving school that we paid $450 for in time, and so we were going to have to do that again. Another family member whom I love was in trouble at school for doing something dumb. And at this point, the one family member that I actually still liked in that moment said to me, Dad, I guess we're all disappointing you right now. At least I think that's what they said, because I was a little distracted because in the video game of my mind, I was taking a black hole and I was moving it right under my whole family. Whew. Now, what emotion could be so powerful that it would make me take people that I love and care about? And to be honest, my family is my favorite people. I really do like them, but I wanted them gone. Like if I had a black hole, I would have moved it there right then. But what emotion is so powerful that it would take me from being a person who like loves and cherishes to a person just wants to get rid of? What emotion is so powerful that it can take you and completely change your posture toward people in your life to where you feel like that button gets pushed and you just want them gone, you want them out, you want to deal with it. And the emotion that we're talking about this week is disappointment. It is a powerful, powerful button. And when this button of disappointment gets pushed, it changes us. It makes us feel things we don't want to feel. It makes us think things we don't want to think. It makes us want to do and say things that we would say, that's not even me. What comes out of me when that button gets pushed? Here's what I've said. It messes us up when people let us down. It messes us up when people let us down. When that disappointment gets pushed, man, we can get ugly. We can get weird. Strange stuff can come out of our hearts and our mouths and our lives when that disappointment button gets pushed. When they didn't clean before company came over like they said they would, and now it's on you, but it's only 30 minutes till they're coming. And so you're not just sweeping, you're sweeping and cussing because that button got pushed and it messed you up. And you don't like what's coming out of you, but that's what happens when that disappointment button gets pushed. When they didn't do their part on the group project, and so your grade went down too. When they didn't pay by the time they said they'd pay. When they didn't invite you to the party. When she has a headache. When the kids don't want relationship with you anymore. When you really needed them in your life, and they knew you really needed them in your life, and they weren't there in your life for you. When that button gets pushed, it messes us up when people let us down. Disappointment is defined as the feeling of sadness or displeasure caused by the non-fulfillment of one's hopes or expectations. A feeling of sadness or displeasure caused by the non-fulfillment of one's hopes or expectations. That button gets pushed and it feels like loss. That button gets pushed and it feels like frustration. It feels like anger. Sometimes it feels like embarrassment because we turn it back on ourselves. How could I be so dumb to hope that they would have done better after the way that they've behaved before? Insert Browns fan joke here. How could I be so dumb to expect better after all that I've seen out of them before? And that button gets pushed and it hurts. And when we think about the reality of button pushers and what is it and what is disappointment really and what's at the core of it, if we were to dissect it, it comes down to an expectation gap. It comes down to a difference of what we expected and what got delivered. Here's the reality of disappointment. You had faith in them and they failed you. You had faith in them and they failed you. You expected better and they let you down. If you didn't think they would do better, you wouldn't be disappointed. If you didn't have faith in them to come through, it wouldn't have hurt when they didn't. If you thought they're always late, they're probably going to be late, and then they show up late, yep, par for the course. But if you hoped that this time they'd call on your birthday, if you thought that because they wrecked your car, they'd make good on it and pay you back for it. If you believed that because they knew something was important to you, they'd be there for you, and then they didn't. You had faith in them, and they failed you. You can't go through life just saying, well, then the solution is, I won't have faith in anybody. I just won't trust anybody to do anything and everything will be fine. We can't live like that. You have to have faith that your employees are going to show up on time, that your spouse is going to keep their vows, that the person who said that they'd be your business partner is going to do the thing that go along with being your business partner. We have to go through life putting faith in people to some degree. But the problem is every person you put your faith in is an imperfect, broken person. And what we know about imperfect, broken people is that they have a tendency to fail. They have a tendency to fall short and to blow it. And so every person you put your faith in, it's kind of just a matter of time until they're going to mess up, until they're going to let you down, because every button pusher is a broken person. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. In your notes, I said this: because all people are fallible, disappointment is inevitable. Every single person you put your faith in is not just capable of, but has a propensity toward letting you down. And because all people are fallible, disappointment is inevitable, and you're going to have to deal with that disappointment button getting pushed at some point. Here's the thing, that button is going to get pushed, and it's going to hurt. That button is going to get pushed, and it's gonna hurt. And you know this, it's happened so many times before. And what can happen when we realize that that disappointment button is gonna be pushed and it's gonna hurt is that now we have to ask ourselves the question, how am I gonna deal with it when it gets pushed? And here is where I come back to saying this is maybe one of the most powerful topics we could be talking about in this Button Pusher series. Because one drop of disappointment in the bucket, one push of that button, that can hurt. But another one and another one and another one becomes burdensome, becomes heavy, becomes something that we carry with us. And it's no longer disappointment, now it's disillusionment. It's no longer they let me down, now it's they're always letting me down. They are a letdown. And sometimes it's not even about them. It becomes this cynicism of of course I'm gonna be let down. Of course things aren't gonna go the way that I wish that they would go. Of course this relationship is gonna go bad. Of course all guys only want to hurt you. Of course all Christians are hypocrites. Of course every restaurant is gonna serve you bad food and overcharge you. Of course every relationship is gonna eventually kind of show the other side and go bad. And so it becomes cynicism. It becomes a thing where we actually trend in a direction toward living a fearful, self-protective, small life because we're afraid of what's going to happen with anticipation of disappointment. Here's what I want to tell us. The promise of Jesus to Christians was that I will give you life and I will give it to you abundantly. And the way that we handle disappointment has so much to do about whether we're going to live in the abundance of life that Jesus gives us or whether we're going to live as a cynical, disillusioned person hiding in a corner from the next person that's likely to hurt us. There are probably people in your life that you know that you would say they're strong, they're resilient, they're generous, they're kind, they're optimistic, they're zealous for life, they're open-hearted, and I want to be like them. There are probably other people in your life who you would say they're bitter, they're angry, they're ugly, they're mean, they're scared. They're always looking for when the hammer's going to fall. And I don't want to be like them. And here's what I want to say. Probably the biggest differences as you think about those people comes down to the way that when disappointment happened, how they handle it. The person you are becoming is trending this way or it's trending that way. And the person that you're going to be in your future has so much to do with how you're going to handle the inevitable disappointments when that button gets pushed again and again in your life. And so how do we deal with disappointment? In a way that we could still say, I can hold on to what I want to be true about my life and I can still win at this life, even though fallible people are going to fail me and that button is going to be pushed and it's going to hurt. How can I still win at life? We're going to look at a passage today that I think is so helpful as we read about how the Apostle Paul handled disappointments in his life. In the book of 2 Timothy chapter 4, Paul's in the middle of writing to Timothy, his true son in the faith. To Timothy, a person that he would say, I'm not just a church planter writing to a local pastor. I'm like your spiritual dad. Like I was there before you knew Jesus. I introduced you to Jesus. I taught you how to follow Jesus. I'm teaching you how to lead other people to follow Jesus. And the things you've seen me do, I want you also to do, because this is how you live. This is how you live through the hard stuff. This is how you live through the messy stuff. And in this passage, this is how you live through disappointments. This is how you handle and process these things that have the potential to derail you, but if you do it right, they won't. Paul's reflecting on a time in this chapter when he stood before the Roman government in a trial. A lot of scholars say he stood before Nero himself in a trial. Nero was totally out to get the Christians. Nero was like a criminally insane, despicable human being. Even the people around Nero in his own court, on his own staff, were scared of him. He was a psycho. He kicked one of his own family members to death. He threw people to lions and tore people apart in the streets. And regarding Christians, he lit the city on fire and blamed it on the Christians as his means of eradicating the Christians. And Paul is standing on trial before Nero in what you can imagine had to be an intensely pressure-filled situation. And in that situation, Paul recounts some things that were tremendous disappointments to him through that experience. So we're going to jump in right now to 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 14. Alexander the metal worker, now we don't know a ton about him, but some scholars say that he was actually a part of one of the churches, at least at one point. But whether he testified against Paul or whether he physically harmed Paul or whatever he did, Alexander the metal worker did me a great deal of harm. The Lord will repay him for what he has done. You too should be on your guard against him because he has strongly opposed our message. A couple of things I just want to highlight here as we're thinking about people who disappoint us, let us down, hurt us, fail us. Paul holds a couple of things in tension that I think sometimes we feel like are all over the map. One thing he says is, look, he did the wrong thing, the Lord will repay him. Paul doesn't say, I'm going to get him back. Paul is able to exercise forgiveness and say the Lord will repay him. But listen, the Lord will repay him. So I can forgive somebody, but still know they're going to stand before God for what they've done. I can also forgive somebody and be on my guard against them. I think sometimes we feel like if that person is dangerous to my health or if that person is dangerous in relationship with me, then I can't forgive them. No, you can and be on your guard against them. You can let it go and know that God will still judge it. And Paul says, here's what happened with a person that I expected was going to hurt me. He hurt me. But here's what happened. Listen, with a group of people I didn't expect would have hurt me. And he goes to this next part and he says this. At my first defense, no one came to my support, but everyone deserted me. So there I am on trial. And you know who's there to help out and to support and to show me that they're there for me? No one. Not a single person I led to Jesus. Not a single person I planted a church with. Not a single person that I worked with. Not a single person that I helped and gave money to when they were hungry. Not a single person that I counseled when they were in a low spot. I was there for them, and in my moment of need, they were not there for me. They deserted me. They let me down. I had faith in them, and they failed me. And then he says this powerful statement. May it not be held against them. May it not be held against them. Paul's saying the same thing that he said about Alexander the metal worker in terms of like the Lord will repay him for what he's done. But Paul's actually saying with these people that I love and I'm close to, I hope when they stand before God, God won't hold it against them either. Like, I hope they get off easy when they stand before God. But in terms of me, I'm not holding it against them. I don't know if you've ever felt betrayed and deserted in a moment of need like Paul has here. Disappointments come in a lot of shapes and sizes, but I think there are times in each of our lives when we would say, I expected them to be there for me, but they weren't. Paul said in that moment, what I decided was, may it not be held against them. I'm not going to hold it against them. And then he turns his focus. And he says, but the Lord stood at my side and gave me strength. Okay, I'm done talking about what happened in the past and the people who did let me down. As for that, here's my judgment. May it not be held against them. Now, I'm not going to talk about who let me down. I'm going to talk about who didn't let me down. And he says, but the Lord stood by my side and gave me strength. And he is able to differentiate in this moment that people hurt me, but Jesus didn't. People failed me, but Jesus didn't. People disappointed me, but Jesus didn't. Listen, every time anybody has ever pushed that disappointment button in your life, you know what's true? They failed you, Jesus didn't. They let you down, Jesus didn't. And Paul's even talking about church people here. Here's where I think it gets really tough, is sometimes when church people hurt us, we feel like Jesus did. Paul said, church people let me down, Jesus didn't. He has not let me down. He will never let me down. The Lord stood at my side and gave me strength. And he continues, so that through me, the message might be fully proclaimed and all the Gentiles might hear it. Paul is looking back on this disappointing circumstance, and he is recognizing something really profound. You know what would have happened if they had come? The trial would have had a lot more voices speaking into it. People might have stood as witnesses and came to my defense. But you know what happened instead? I was all alone in front of the whole Roman government, and all I could do was talk about Jesus. And the mission of Paul's life, he said, was I want to talk about Jesus to people who haven't heard Jesus. And you know what happened? Because people let me down, because people failed me, because people disappointed me, do you know what happened? Through me, the message was fully proclaimed and all the Gentiles were able to hear it. God used it. Sometimes, and I don't understand why, and you might not ever understand why, but sometimes God allows disappointments to happen in our lives to further his mission. And he uses the fact that people hurt you and let you down to create opportunities where other people get to hear about Jesus. Other people get to see the character of Jesus. Other people get to see what it's like when Christians act awesome in the face of disappointment. And a bunch of people got to hear about Jesus because some people disappointed Paul. Paul continues to look kind of just through the lens of faith, and he says, and I was delivered from the lion's mouth. I don't know if he means Nero's a lion and I got away from him, or if he means they would have sent me to the lions. It could be either one of those, but he says either way, I was acquitted. I got out of that one. I'm still alive. I'm writing this letter. So I was delivered from the lion's mouth, and the Lord will rescue me from every evil attack and will bring me safely to his heavenly kingdom. Here's what he's not saying. No one's ever going to disappoint me again. No one's ever going to hurt me again. We know Paul well enough to know he believes that's still coming. But what he is saying is over and above all of that, yep, that's going to be true. There's going to be more pain. There's going to be more disappointment. That button's going to get pushed again and again and again. But over all that, the Lord's got me, and he's going to bring me safely home to him. Even though this life is going to continue to be full of disappointments, he's going to rescue me from all of those, and he's going to bring me safely home to his heavenly kingdom. And so a story that started with the failure of others ends with the faithfulness of God. It started with the failure of others, and it ends with the faithfulness of God. And Paul wraps it up by saying, to him be the glory forever and ever. Amen. That button is going to be pushed, and it's going to hurt. Why? Because every person you put your faith in is a fallible person, and so they're going to let you down. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. But here's the good news. When people let you down, it does not have to mess you up. When people let you down, it does not have to derail you, turn you disillusioned, turn you cynical, make you live a small, scared life. It doesn't have to. There's a way to deal with disappointments and still have zest for life and open-heartedness toward people and a love for God and a faith that is intact. When people let you down, it doesn't have to mess you up. Here's what I want us to understand today. I can live fully and freely even when people fail me. I can live fully and freely even when people fail me. Jesus said, I came to give you life, and life more abundant. But if people go and disappoint you, deal's off. Because I can't do that. No, he didn't say that. He factored into the equation every disappointment you will ever experience. And he said, if you're walking with me, you know what you'll still call it in the end? Abundant life. Why? Because I can live fully and freely even when people fail me. It doesn't have to take away from the fact that I can have joy and peace and confidence and purpose and a connection to God and a love for others even when people fail me. Because every story that starts with their failure, it ends with the faithfulness of God. And Paul went on from this to run a missionary journey to Spain, to plant more churches, to write more letters that developed more people, and have developed many of us in our discipleship journey, to go on and have really important, critical, meaningful relationships with people. And none of that held him back. Why? Because I can live fully and freely even when people fail me. And you can too. And as we look at some things that just kind of bubble up out of this passage to Timothy, we're going to find some things that we can apply to our lives so that we can live fully and freely even when people fail us. And the first one of those is this. Here's the first thing that we can do in order to understand we can live fully and freely even when people fail us, is be specific about their failure. Be specific about their failure. Paul said, no one came to my defense. Everyone deserted me. That's what went wrong. That was the expectation that went unmet that caused the pain. Sometimes I think the reason why we don't move through disappointment into something better is because we don't give the specificity to be able to even fix it and address it. I was driving back from Texas recently. My grandmother passed away in Texas, and so we took an 18-hour drive down there to spend 24 hours there for the funeral and drove 18 hours back. And by the time we got back, my van was feeling cranky, grumpy, tired. And that's what I told the mechanic. It feels grumpy. Drives tired. I'd have believed the mechanic if they had said, well, that's because your van is total trash and you should just throw it away right now. I would have believed it. But instead, the mechanic took it back, diagnosed it, looked carefully, and came back to me with some specific things. There's a serpentine belt. There's some shocks. There's some other things that need addressed. But beneath this just like general disappointment that it's not being what I hoped it would be, there are some actual specific things that if called out, can be addressed and fixed. And I think sometimes we don't let relationships move forward because we don't get to the granular reality of like, what exactly is wrong? What exactly is the expectation that you feel like is going unmet? There might be relationships in your life. I just got to believe that there's somebody hearing this. There's a relationship in your life you're about to throw out because it just feels generically disappointing. But if you dug into like, okay, but specifically, what is the expectation that feels unmet? You would be able to address that, and you would be able to fix it, and you would be able to salvage a relationship that you care about. Sometimes when we say the thing out loud, it comes back on us because we realize that's not a realistic expectation. If the mechanic had said back to me, well, when's the last time you got an oil change? And I said 5 years ago, the mechanic would say, well, then you have an unrealistic expectation that your van is going to keep working right when you're not taking good care of it. Maybe when you say the thing out loud, you realize the expectation you have isn't really realistic. You don't buy me flowers every day. Okay, is that realistic? You don't tell me I'm pretty often enough. Is that realistic? You didn't keep your marriage vows. That is realistic. There are things that we once we say them out loud, we're able to say to ourselves, is that a helpful expectation to have? Is that a realistic expectation to have? And if it is, then we've identified a gap. Then we've identified a specific failure, and we can set them up for their next step, which if they're a good-willed person, a high character, their next step is to own it and to move forward with it. But even if they don't, we set ourselves up for our next step because now at least we know what we're dealing with. Failure is real, and people fail us in specific ways. But we can live fully and freely even when people fail us. But let's first start with being able to say what exactly is wrong. When we know that, we can move on to the next step, which is to do this. Exercise your right to forgive. Exercise your right to forgive. Paul said, they didn't show up for me, everybody deserted me. And then he said, may it not be held against them. Powerful, powerful words. Because what he was choosing to say in this moment is, I exercise my right to forgive and to let it go. A lot of times, I know this, forgiveness feels like laying down your right to get satisfaction, laying down your right for justice, laying down your right to hold it against them. But I just want us to understand today, holding something against them really is just holding it on you. Here's the reality that I hope I can kind of illustrate. They did something that bothered you. They said you were going to be in their wedding, and then they didn't invite you to their wedding, and you can hold that against them if you want. Somebody hurt you when you were really young, and it was a long time ago, and you can hold that if you want and take it through life with you. And every time that disappointment button gets pushed, you have the choice of what you're going to do with it, and you can hold it against them. You have that right. And some of us are going through life a lot like this, where every time that button gets pushed, we decide, I'm going to hold it. I'm going to hold it, and I'm going to take it with me as I hold it against them. Anybody getting nervous? Yeah? Okay, if you... If you invited me to come to lunch with you today, and I tried to get in your car like this, I tried to get to the table and sit down with you like this, and have a conversation with you like this, it would be awkward, it would be distracting, it would be difficult. Some of you are trying to live out relationships with people holding all of these things, and you wonder why it's awkward and distracting and difficult all the time. It's because you're holding so much stuff with you everywhere you go. Paul said, may it not be held against them. Paul said the Lord's going to repay him for what he's done. So I don't have to hold it. He's going to stand before God for it, so I don't have to hold it. Yes, they did this thing, it's real, but I don't have to hold it. The fact is, they let me down. And sometimes forgiveness is a choice and I can just do this, and sometimes it's a process and I have to keep doing this. But I don't have to hold it. And listen, sometimes choosing not to hold it doesn't mean the relationship doesn't change. It does, but I don't have to hold it. Sometimes I still have to be on my guard, but I don't have to hold it. Why? Because I can live fully and freely even when people fail me, because I don't have to hold it. And the key to this is, do I believe that God, the righteous judge, is going to take care of this stuff? If so, I don't have to hold it. You don't have to hold it. And the degree to which you are quick to forgive, the degree to which you are free to forgive, the degree to which you can live fully and freely even though people fail you, has so much to do with, do you believe that God is a perfect judge who judges perfectly? Because if you do, you don't have to hold it. It's not yours to hold. He's going to deal with it. The choice you're making is just, are you going to weigh yourself down? I'll only hold it until I get my satisfaction. I'll only hold it until they say they're sorry, and then things get made right. Be honest with yourself. How often does it work out like that? How often have you gotten your satisfaction on the other side of the thing? It's just going to come back to you and the question, are you going to hold it? And you have the right to if you want, but this is not abundant living. This is not what Jesus promised us. Exercise your right to forgive and to live fully and freely even when people fail you. The third thing that we see in Paul, and I think this is so powerful, I think this is so critical for us to understand as we're thinking about what we do when people push that disappointment button. The third thing is this: filter your disappointment through your faith. Filter your disappointment through your faith. Paul said, they let me down, but Jesus didn't. They let me down and God used it. They let me down, but God's going to get me home safe to him. So even in disappointment, Paul was looking through the lens of faith, and what he was saying is, I see God's presence with me, I see God's providence over it, and I see God's promise that he's going to bring me home. Looking through the lens of faith at his disappointment. We all understand like filters that we use on phones. So whatever app you use or social media platform you use, you can choose different filters. And I can be looking at a person, but I can make them look like their head's upside down. I can be looking at a person, but through the filter, I can make them look like a dancing watermelon through the filter that I'm looking at. I can make them look a different color or a different shape or have different characteristics. What I'm saying is, depending on what you're looking through, what you're looking at seems very different. Paul said, I'm going to look at my disappointment through the lens of faith. Here's where it really goes wrong for so many of us, and so many of us have done this. We've looked at God through the lens of our disappointment. We've said, God, your goodness doesn't look like goodness through the lens of my disappointment. Your faithfulness doesn't look like faithfulness through the lens of how other people have hurt me. And when we look at God's sovereignty and his ability to control all things and his promises to us and his goodness to us simply through the lens of our disappointment, it looks pretty different and it's pretty hard to understand. And what Paul did was he flipped it. He said, I'm going to look at my disappointment through the lens of my faith. And when you do that, the disappointment starts to look pretty different. Yep, they failed me and they let me down, but Jesus didn't. Yeah, they failed me and they let me down, but you know what's true? God used it. Friends, do you understand God uses it when people disappoint you? In any time that somebody disappoints you, lets you down, does you wrong, there are a few different things that can happen, and often multiple of these happen. Number one, it gives you an opportunity to develop the characteristics of Christ in your life. Because that hard thing, it hurts you and it makes you have to develop godly character, and God uses those things to shape you to become more like Jesus. Number two, it gives you a chance to display the characteristics of Jesus to other people, to be God's man or God's woman in a difficult situation, which people notice. People see that and they see Jesus in Christians in the way that they handle disappointment. And number three, it creates opportunities to further God's mission. It did for Paul. A lot of us know the story of Joseph and how his brothers sold him to Egypt, and then later on, he says to his brothers, you literally meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. The things that people do to us, even with bad intentions and the disappointments and the hurts, God uses those to further his mission. And ultimately, I look at my disappointment through the lens of my faith and I go, yep, that's going to be real for as long as I'm on this earth. Because in this world I'll have trouble, but he's overcome the world. He's going to bring me safely home to a place where there's no more disappointment anymore. I look at my disappointment through the lens of faith, and it changes everything. And that's how I can live fully and freely even when people fail me. Is remember that every story that started with their failure, the thing that is constant all the way through it is God is faithful. God is faithful. And so I can live fully and freely even when people fail me. Listen, dealing with disappointment is hard. It's messy, it's complicated, and I think that's the reason why so many of us get it wrong. And there are probably ways that as I've been talking today, you're thinking about situations that you would go, I kind of got that one wrong. I didn't deal with that correctly. And so our action step, our homework for this weekend is to do this, to go back and deal with your disappointer, but do it right this time. Deal with your disappointer. Do it right. Not in a way that's idealistic and surprised that somebody let you down. Not in a way that's cynical and just believing that's all they'll ever do. Not in a way that's not helpful and doesn't give specificity and next steps. Deal with it in a way where you say, I'm looking at my disappointment through my faith, and I'm choosing not to hold it against them because God's the ultimate judge. Go back and deal with your disappointer. Life is messy and life is hard, but Jesus equips us for messy and hard stuff. And in the gospel, we find what we need to be able to deal with every button that gets pushed in our lives. And it shows us how, but it shows us even more than just how. Let's write this down, and then I just want to unpack it for a second. The gospel gives us not only the how, but also the why. When people disappoint us, why would we want to deal with those disappointers with second chances? Why would we want to deal with them with grace? Why would we want to deal with them with kindness? Why would we want to take the people who hurt us and fail us and let us down and live gracefully toward them with forgiveness and kindness? The shortest answer I can give you is this: because that's what Jesus does for you. Because that's what Jesus does for you. Come on. Just pretend for a second like we're about to make a list of all the ways you've disappointed Jesus. Man, for all the times that I have been ungrateful, that I have broken promises, that I have deprioritized him, that I have run after secret sins and idols and and the list goes on and on and on. And what does he do? He gives grace. And what does he do? He gives second chances. And what does he do? He loves. And how is he toward us? Gracious and patient and inviting and loving. Why would we want to deal with disappointers with grace when they push our buttons? Why would we want to do that? Because that's what Jesus does for us. And I can deal best with people who disappoint me when I'm most aware of the ways that I myself am that button pusher. When the ways that I myself need that grace. When I realize just how much grace I live in all the time. And so we wanted to close service with a reminder of the grace that we've been given, and we're going to do that through communion. Communion is an interesting word. It comes from the combination of two different words, union and with. Closeness and with. And when we're thinking about communion, what it is really signifying is a closeness with Jesus. That when we take the bread and when we take the cup, what we're doing is we're reminding ourselves and we're creating a moment of intimacy and closeness with Jesus around what he has done for us. How does that connect to the idea of how we deal with disappointers? Here's how. There's some realities in Scripture that John writes about and that Jesus says. One of the things that John warns us about is that you can't pretend to love and be close to Jesus while hating somebody. And as we get ready to take communion, that might provide for you a little bit of a hard stop to go, oh, I have to deal with that. Because in my heart, I'm hating somebody. Jesus says to us, if you don't forgive other people, your Father in heaven will not forgive you. He really said that. And that might provide a little bit of a catch in some of our spirits to go, oh, before I do this, I better deal with that. And adjust my heart posture towards somebody that I am not forgiving. And so before we go and take the bread and take the cup, what I want us just to recognize is that there are sometimes some accountability measures that lead us up toward a moment like this. And one of them is, let's check our hearts for how we're dealing with our disappointers. Are you hating? Are you holding unforgiveness towards somebody? And if so, would you take just a moment right now? I'm going to ask all of us to take about 40 seconds right now, just in quiet, close your eyes, bow your heads between you and God. Is there somebody that comes to mind? You should deal with this before you take communion. Let's take a minute for that right now. We forgive because we've been forgiven. We give grace because we've received grace. And that grace is not free. It's not cheap. It's not easy. In fact, it's incredibly costly. But that grace changed everything. Changed it so that every story that starts with our failure ends with his faithfulness. Communion gives us a chance to celebrate that and to remember the cost. So right now, let's remember the cost as we take the bread that reminds us of the broken body of Jesus. Let's remember the cost as we take the cup that reminds us of the shed blood of Jesus. Let's remember the cost as we stand and as we celebrate and as we sing and worship the suffering Savior.